So I have the pleasure to introduce Margaret Swedish. She has been involved in different kinds of activism, starting with working with people in Central America with the Religious Task Force on Central America and Mexico in Washington, D.C., and now has really moved into addressing the questions and also the actions that we can take to confront this ecological crisis that we are currently in. She was a speaker for you all a few years ago, and we're really glad to welcome her back with us.
It is really wonderful to be back with you. There's so many familiar faces here. I feel like I've sort of dropped in every so often along the path of your journey, and it's been really a privilege to know many of you, especially that old troublemaker, Jim Zielinski, who was such a great colleague during all the years of the Central America Solidarity work here in the United States. So if you thought this morning's session was hard, I promise you it's not going to get easier. We are dealing with some very difficult material, and I echo what Mary said about, and what the Pope has said, that humans are at an extraordinary crossroads right now. There's one path that we've been on that's coming to a very rapid end, and it's not ending gently. It's ending very harshly and leaving us with some real challenges ahead. But even as that's happening, we have to remember that there's something else going on at the same time, as people who are aware of the crisis are beginning to find the ways through, the pass through. So I'm going to talk about both of those things this morning and this afternoon. The work I've been doing has been sort of, for the last several years, has been under this theme of spirituality and ecological hope, because I think part of getting to the roots of the crisis is that we have to get underneath those layers of meaning. What is the sort of meaning framework that created this industrial economic growth civilization that is now, facing collapse in the years to come? Whether or not people are in denial about that, that does seem to be what's happening. Spirituality involves how we live. It involves the values that shape our lives, the search for a deeper meaning in the interior of our lives and in the reality of this creation we're all part of, and then how we reflect that deeper meaning back out into the world. And I would say that alone, if you want to look at what industrial civilization has done, especially in the last 150 or so years, and especially since World War II, where it really ramped up big time, we can say that what's being reflected back out into the world, if it reflects the deeper meaning, then we have some serious questions we have to ask ourselves as human beings. And ecological hope, this question of hope that comes up all the time, because people, they just keep wanting me to tell them there's hope and what hope is. And I always want to tell them hope for me is, it's a verb, it's not a noun. I can't give you hope. Hope is the decision we make about what we're going to do. And if there's going to be hope for getting through the crisis, it's going to be because we create it together. The hope is in what we do. Not in sitting back and hoping. Hope is not optimism. It's not, hey, everything's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. But hope is that hope against hope, that as we go through this difficult time, something new is going to emerge that I really believe ultimately will be better, even though I may not see that better. But I think it's really important we start to pave the way towards that better world. So we're looking at the third chapter, Human Roots, which is very, very challenging. And you can tell just from the conversation that began after Mary's presentation that we could probably spend a whole week just on that chapter and uncovering the different layers of what our way of life has done. So I want to look a little bit at this way of life, the certain way that, as the Pope says in his beautiful language, a certain way of understanding human life and activity that has gone awry. What's the evidence of everything kind of going awry? How about what's happening in the Southwest right now? How about the fact that the Arctic Ocean may go ice-free this summer? We're predicting that it may finally happen, that we will start to have these ice-free summers. How about the fact that every month we're breaking heat records? or that we're going over the top in terms of carbon pollution into the atmosphere. So there's a certain way of human life and activity that has gone awry. And we need to understand what's at the roots of that so that we can start to take out those roots and plant something else. So I just wanted very quickly to show some images that I think help us, and remembering that these are also the kinds of images, input facts that the Pope was looking at as he's writing this down. And I always find this really enlightening when I show this to people, because when I was born in 1949, the global population was under 2.5 billion, and we're now at 7.4. That happened in my one lifetime. And I want to say anybody who doesn't think that that was going to have an enormous impact on the planet doesn't really understand how ecology works, the interconnectedness of everything. The planet is feeling this presence, this exponential growth of human population. So right about here, that date, this is about 1820, right in here. 1820 is the beginning of the steam engine and the beginning of discovering that whale oil and things like that really work, right? So this is just, that's not that long ago, right? We're talking less than 200 years. And right about here is World War II, and the end of World War II, and then boom, off we go. This is part of what has made it possible for us to this point to support this growing population of humans on the planet. We've been burning fossil fuel like crazy since in the last couple of hundred years. And again, especially, we look at what's happened since 1850. This line is right in sync with the growth in world population. Why? Because we developed this amazing thing called fossil fuels, especially oil, that burns slowly and efficiently and could begin to support this dynamic industrial civilization that we've lived in. One result, these are the most recent measures from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have a big testing station up on top of Mauna Loa in Hawaii. It's our #1 measure because it's high enough and the air is clean enough that it's a good measure of CO2 in the atmosphere, of carbon in the atmosphere. And as probably a lot of you know, 350 was considered a safe level, that we shouldn't go beyond that if we don't want to have major impacts on the planet. We went over that a long time ago, but the thing that's really scary now, as you see up here, in just from May of last year, 403.94 to 407.70 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. It's escalating very, very quickly now. And there was an article just recently in the Washington Post by their environmental writer, Christopher Mooney, who says the climate scientists are saying that probably in our generation and several generations to come, we will not see carbon below 400 anymore, ever again. It's like that era is over. I have trouble absorbing this stuff, right? This is some heavy stuff. So there's a certain way that has gone awry, and it looks a lot like this. Coal-fired power plants, and down here, I don't know if you can see this image really well, the left hand on the bottom there is just an endless horizon of pumping jacks and fracking wells in Oklahoma, or in Texas. And then, of course, our car culture, our automobile culture with all of our freeways. And the result is that this is what our global temperature is starting to do. And you've all seen a million images like this. But again, I think it's just important to see this as we reflect on the chapter on the encyclical. This was the average land and ocean temperature anomalies, the average from April, just this past April. Maps look like this all the time. The worst of the warming is happening in the northern hemisphere. Alaska, by the way, is erupted in flames again. I just saw that yesterday in the news. And one of the major reasons for this, and this is one of those graphs that stays with me. I show this every time I do a workshop or a presentation, because this points to the problem in sum. The green line is the biocapacity of the Earth, what the Earth has available to us for us to live in abundance with what we need. And that line keeps going down and down because the other line, which is the human ecological footprint, keeps going up and up and up. That, in a nutshell, is the problem. We're simply taking too much from the planet. It can't replace it. It can't absorb our waste anymore. We're living beyond the biocapacity of the Earth. And the fact that those two lines continue to separate is very worrisome. leading to the point that by 2030 we will need 2 Earths to keep going as we're going. If the whole world, if the idea, and this was often sort of the concept behind some of the old social justice work of decades ago, was that everybody should be able to live like us, right? There shouldn't be this poverty. Everybody should have what we have. If we tried to move in that direction, it would take 5 Earths to support that project. So everybody can't live like us. And those of us who have more than we need have to really think about what that means. Because we either consign more and more people to poverty, or we realize we have to start really going downwardly mobile in the way we live, consuming less so that others can consume more, but still go back to living within what our one planet has available to us. So you probably can't read this, but I put together just one slide that I thought pulled out from the 3rd chapter of just what I thought were a good summary points of what the Pope is trying to say about what the roots are of this problem. And some of these Mary talked about, the dominant technocratic paradigm, this belief that we can somehow objectively control things. We can get control of this if we just develop more technology, find a better way to do things. And the more we seem to try, the worse things seem to get. Our immense technological development has not been accompanied by a development in human responsibility, values, and conscience. The development of technology in the economy is way ahead of our reflection on what is the moral implication of what we're doing. We never stop to think, is this the right thing to do? Right? Morally, ethically, spiritually, what does it say that we're making these decisions to keep advancing technology without a lot of deep thought about it? And why don't we do that? Because it would slow down the economy, right? We now have instantaneous profits being made on stock markets where you can do nanosecond investments and make fortunes. So to say, well, wait, we all have to stop now for a minute and think about this is impossible in the economic logic of the system that we live in right now. The lie that there is an infinite supply of the Earth's goods, as I mentioned before, we are living so far beyond what the planet has available to us. So the planet's being squeezed dry beyond every limit. The deepest roots of our present failures, which have to do with the direction, goals, meaning, and social implications of technological and economic growth. Ask somebody at Walmart what the meaning of their labor is and what they feel their labor is contributing to the betterment of humanity and the planet. Right? The use and throwaway logic, I love that he over and over again calls us this throwaway culture. We just keep throwing stuff away, and I try to tell people, you can't throw anything away. All you do is move it from here to here. Doesn't matter if it's the garbage or a landfill or whatever it is. You're moving it from here to here. It doesn't go away. We just make it disappear from our thoughts and our consciousness. Oops. The need for a correct understanding of work, as I said, a technology separate from ethics will not easily be able to limit its own power. These are some of, I think, just main points in his rather scathing indictment of economic growth, the economic growth paradigm that we live in. What does a misguided anthropocentrism look like? It looks like this. On the left at the top is the tar sands industrial region in Alberta. I was there, spent some time there in September 2013. I have yet to recover. On the right at the top is the train that exploded in Lac Mégantic, the oil train that was full of Bakken oil that blew up and killed 47 people and destroyed the whole center of their town. On the left, left side at the bottom here, this is China. It's a place in China that is going through rapid aridification. This was once a forest and a village, and it's now aridifying so rapidly that sand is just blowing over it. It's just changing into what will look like Saudi Arabia. On the bottom right is a frac sand mine in western Wisconsin. And this is like shockingly, they're mining the sand, beautiful agricultural land that unfortunately has just the right sand they need for fracking. Sand that's the silica sand that you mix in with the water and the chemicals, the solvents that you put into the wells when you drill them. When they break open the fractures to bring up the oil and the gas, they use the sand, this goop, to hold the fractures open so that the gas and the oil continue to come up. This was once farms, and this is going on all through western and central Wisconsin. Industrial agriculture, I can hardly stand to look at it. Shopping malls, this is the life that has gone awry. And we end up with situations like we had in Flint. And this, which I always like to put in because I think it's important to put all of our consumption into perspective. This is a rare earth mineral mine in California. What are rare earth minerals? They're not really rare, but they're these minerals that are mixed into the earth in certain parts of the planet that are used for computer screens, smartphones, lithium batteries, solar panels. No question about how many solar panels we really can put up around the world, because that's what we need to do to get the materials for solar panels, right? Also interesting that one of the reasons why is Afghanistan so important that it's been the center of all this war for so many decades. Guess what they have a lot of in Afghanistan? They're really not just fighting over whether or not there's going to be a jihadist fundamentalist government in Afghanistan. We wouldn't care. We could care less. But there's a lot of rare earth mineral locations in Afghanistan that have yet to be tapped. So again, I mean, I could spend a whole day just showing us this really hard news. But again, it's trying to get underneath what is it that the Pope is looking at when he's addressing the human roots of the crisis. These are the human right roots. And I want to say right now, because I think this is also really important, because it's really easy to get loaded with a lot of guilt. And like our Alcoa friends, to remember that while we're beginning to come into the knowledge of what we've done, nobody set out from the beginning to destroy the planet, right? We look at this, and I think the point is not to feel overwhelming guilt because our way of life has created this. We didn't know. It happened so fast. But now that we know, now there is real culpability and moral responsibility for how we respond to that knowledge, right? So part of it is not to do the guilt tripping, but to accept that there is a responsibility we have to own now, because if we created this conundrum, this predicament, we're the only ones that can change it. But how do we change something this big, this ubiquitous? It's a way of life in which we've all grown dependent. Who was it? Robert? Where's Robert? Talking about how he was told he had to have a cell phone. Sharing that last night. Okay, I understand cell phones. I've had one for 15 years, so my cell phone's like 15 years old, so I don't feel quite so guilty about my cell phone. And it does have incredible, not just convenience, but security, safety, communicate, logistical stuff, very important. But let's also acknowledge that 20 years ago we didn't have them, or 25 years ago, and somehow we all got along, right? We very quickly grow dependent on these technologies and then consider them absolutely necessary to our way of life, to how we live. So it's good to have a little perspective. You know, this keeps moving so fast, and we become dependent on technology so quickly, it just takes my breath away. I mean, what's something in the brain that needs to be rewired? So how do we change this? We have to change that certain way of understanding human life and activity, and how we live, what we do, what we teach and preach, cultivating a new way of understanding human life and activity. I think this is so important, right? We have to come to a new way of understanding what we're doing here on this planet. And we do this by way of what he calls, and I'm going to do this a little more also this afternoon, a bold cultural revolution. When I first read this document, that phrase just leapt off the page at me. What? He's calling for a bold cultural revolution. That's a very strong term, right? Revolution is about from the bottom up, turning everything over. And to do what? What is the revolution about? To restore the values and the great goals swept away by our unrestrained delusions of grandeur. I love that phrasing, because I think it speaks to a certain pathology in the way humans have tried to preside over creation rather than live within it. So, how do we transform what has gone awry? These are my words, not his, but I sort of pull them out as, again, some summary reflections. We need to tear out the human roots of the ecological crisis, plant something new, something healthy, something that can renew and regenerate life rather than destroy it. The earth has amazing healing powers, but we have to get back into sync with it and learn how to cooperate with that. We replenish the earth. We plant new seeds in order to sink down new roots. Here's another sort of interesting metaphor, though it's something quite real. When people were given land out in the Great Plains way back when, right? You probably have heard the story. The Dust Bowl was a completely human-created crisis. It was not created. Yes, there was drought, but what created the Dust Bowl is that when all these people went out because the government was giving away land, and so that they wanted to settle the Great Plains and create this great rain-producing region, people went out there and there were these prairie grasses everywhere. And prairie grasses are amazing life forms. They sink down roots that go several feet into the earth. And that's one of the reasons for thousands of years, the Great Plains could withstand drought and wind because of the deep roots of the prairie grasses that held the soil in place. So now come along humans, and again, they didn't know this, right? They did the labor that it took to dig up all that prairie grass was incredible, and then they grow wheat. And then there's drought, and that root system is gone, and the soil blows right off, creating these dust storms. Some of this dust blew all the way to Washington, D.C., to the Dakotas. It was everywhere. Because we made a mistake. We didn't understand the ecological reality of that part of the world. So again, it's another lesson. If you think about how many times we've done that, we go into an area, mine, dig, deforest, without any concept of what the results might be. And finally, wherever we are, we create the new ways of life that he's calling for, that the Pope is calling for, and the new labor of love for the planet, for the gifts of creation, and for one another. Which means more balanced levels of production, a better distribution of wealth, concern for the environment and the rights of future generations. These are now his words. Okay? To do that change, it means these things. Work as the setting for rich personal growth. He talks about work as part of the meaning of life on this earth, which is to me part of what's so sad to see what's happened, especially in the service part of the economy, where people are working at minimum wages for horrible jobs that have no meaning. And then to build economies of scale, emphasizing small producers and differentiated production. Again, that's going to come up more than once today in my presentations, especially that last one. And then perhaps the hardest sell in this consumer society, we have to radically scale down our consumer lifestyles to live within the limits of the planet and the exigencies of social justice. And this chapter, which is really in the integral ecology section for this afternoon, was one I did want to dig out because I think it's really important in the context of what we're talking about here. Doomsday predictions can no longer be met with irony or disdain, right? When some of us have been accused for a long time of these doomsday scenarios, and then what happens when exactly the scenarios you're predicting were going to happen are happening, okay? The Pope, again, very aware of this. Doomsday predictions can no longer be met with irony or disdain. And it is important to remember there is this Pontifical Academy of Sciences and Social Sciences. The Vatican actually has available to it, when people were accusing the Pope of saying, how dare he doesn't know anything, he has available to him at any time some of the greatest scientists in the world. And so the work in this document is really well grounded in science. We may well be leaving to coming generations debris, desolation, and filth. The pace of consumption, waste, and environmental change has so stretched the planet's capacity that our contemporary lifestyle, unsustainable as it is, can only precipitate catastrophes, such as those which even now periodically occur in different areas of the world. The effects of the present imbalance can only be reduced by our decisive action here and now. Man, I used to get criticized for saying things not nearly as dire as this, right? I mean, I was reading this document saying, whoa, Pope Francis, don't hold back. Just say what you're thinking. Whoa. I mean, no wonder there's a pushback. And frankly, I get annoyed when people call it his encyclical on climate change. Yeah, climate change is in there. It's in there. There's some pages on climate change, but whoa, what this guy's talking about is really, really big. Okay? Climate change is just one part of it. And then this statement, which Mary talked about, but I also quoted on ecological culture. This is paragraph 111. Just sit with it. It's just, I think, a really important paragraph. But I wanted to really bring out in red, what I think is part of what the Pope offers us when we think about what's the agenda, what do we actually do? What do we think about whether it's the Capuchins or the work I'm doing or an urban farm that I'm participating in, or what is it? What's the agenda for all of us who realize we have to get a grasp of this larger picture, but then still figure out how we ourselves can have any kind of role or impact? What is that agenda? We need to find a distinctive way of looking at things, right? We have to really alter the way we see the world. We have to think about the policies that are being implemented. Again, we know a lot now. It is not an appropriate technology to keep pursuing fracking, which is a growth industry and still is a growth industry in the United States. And without being too political, there are certain political leaders running for office who have really pushed fracking all around the world, right? This is not the way we need to go. So we need to think about, again, as communities, as citizens, as participants in the society, how we can promote policies that begin to support this new way of thinking, that move us in another direction, and be active advocates of these policies. We need to come up with an educational program, because hard as this is, boy, we need to be bringing this to our communities, creating spaces where people can really talk about this stuff, right? Because it's scary stuff. There's pushback, there's fear, right? But to lay out the agenda and listen to people's fears and their feelings, and then talk a little bit about what this economic culture really has done to us. Do we like it? Is it possible we could start coming together as communities in a different way of life in the process of addressing together this crisis we're dealing with? And then to really reflect deeply on lifestyle and spirituality, which again, I love his language, it's very strong, which together generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm. He's so Latin American in this, he's not afraid of words like revolution and resistance, right? Those words are much more ordinary in the context of Latin America than they are here, where we still, in the mainstream culture, still have problems with those words. We think, oh, they're conflictual and all of this stuff. There's a point where you have to say no to this. There has to be a pushback. And in that pushback, though, witnessing this culture, this bold cultural revolution, this new way of life. So the word biocentrism is troubling, and so I thought it's interesting. I think biocentrism is a word that's worthy of conversation, but then my question was, so what would a healing, balanced biocentrism look like? Right? We are part of the evolution and unfolding of the planet. We are deeply integrated into all the webs of life and existence on this planet. We are part of it. Everything we do has an impact. I breathe out oxygen, I take in carbon, I'm part of the whole breathing of the planet. What I eat affects the planet. What I buy affects the planet. What I drive affects the planet. Coming here affected the planet in some way. So what would a healing, balanced biocentrism look like, where I'm really conscious of the role that I play and try to do that role, to engage in a way that helps to heal that ecological web of life rather than break it. So these are just some images that I hope just to, sort of wake up some creativity, or just put you in touch with some of the things you already know that are going on or that you've been part of. I love that, for a simple life, a perfect day. Wouldn't it be wonderful if being back in nature and growing and eating your own food gave people meaning again instead of watching their stock portfolios? On the upper right corner, that's a very poor neighborhood in Milwaukee, where a church there called All People's Church, which is a non-denominational, incredible place. They basically squatted this property that belonged to the city of Milwaukee. These were empty lots. And they decided they wanted to become part of this urban food renewal movement that's going on, and is quite strong actually in the Milwaukee area. So these slots were empty, so they just squatted, and they started offering to the community little plots. And so families that were part of the community came out and they claimed little spaces and started growing tomatoes, and some young people came out and they put in little benches and painted them and little signs. And then the city came in and said, "Excuse me, you don't know that land, we do, and you need to leave." And so the church, who's led by a bit of a firebrand minister, basically said no. And so they just stayed. And after another year, the city came along and said, "Okay, we'll give it to you for $1."
Oh, gosh.
I mean, just claim the spaces. I mean, that's resistance, right? They just did it. They didn't listen to the authorities. They just did the thing because they knew it was right and just. And now they have this beautiful place. Defend the sacred, protect our water. That's a wonderful protest that was led by some of the First Nation peoples. But we're finding around water, there's a huge global movement going on around defending waters. And there's almost no place you live where you can't be part of one or participate in one. And you know, just being able to walk in nature, we're losing so many places. Alice's garden, this is where I garden in Milwaukee. It's in a troubled neighborhood. It's been an amazing space for about 27 years. The community there is extraordinary. The Body and Soul Healing Arts Center is part of it. You can't believe all the stuff that goes on around this urban farm, from yoga to massage to growing herbal remedies to people coming to dance together, to sit and do readings together. There's a labyrinth there. It's just this amazing sacred space right in the heart of a very difficult and challenged neighborhood in Milwaukee. And then that bottom left, it's a relatively new group. They've been around for a couple of years called Teens Grow Greens. I love the name. Wonderful young man, Charlie Eline, who started this. He's in his late 20s. And they're having kids come there. Kids are being able to apprentice in how to grow seedlings and get the seedlings to the farmers markets in the spring. And it's just been an amazing project that has grown really fast. So again, these are really concrete things. And of course, public witness and solidarity, really important. Really important. That where there are these movements and groups from below that are rising up to defend their places, that we find ways as institutions and communities to be with them and support them as they do that. In other words, a bold cultural revolution. There's the big climate march in New York. The beauty of these marches is not because in the immediate aftermath everything changes. It's that they give you these moments when you can get a measure of just how big the movement's becoming, because we don't always know. And then someone has a march and 500,000 people show up, and that's just New York. I mean, it was all over the world. It gives you a lot of. I mean, that's what hope really is. I mean, it gives you a lot of this energy, this belief that we're not just this compliant species that's going to go to our collective suicide as the earth collapses. No, there's quite a lot of empowering things going on. If the mainstream media doesn't cover it, well, you know who owns the mainstream media, so we can be clear about that. So what's the agenda for a bold cultural revolution to help us move out of this crisis? There needs to be, again, in sum, a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, policies, an educational program, a lifestyle and a spirituality which together generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm. That's a great framework, I think, for then sitting in your local communities with whatever groups you're connected with, the projects, the inner cities, the rural areas, and begin to build communities with people where with this as a framework you say, so what can we do here? What's the most hands-on stuff we can do to heal these places where we are, right? To heal the places where we are, resist the encroachment of the big thing, and begin then to also do public witness in solidarity with other people who are engaging in similar forms of resistance and bold cultural revolution. So my last thought, and then we can have some time for questions and answers, is that we in the Upper Midwest, and I know probably most of us here, right, are in some way connected with the Upper Midwest. We have a really big challenge because we were really part of the Industrial Revolution big time, right? All these old Rust Belt cities and the manufacturing industries that have collapsed all around us. Every time I hear politicians talk about how we need to we're going to bring back manufacturing jobs, I want to say stop lying to people, because that's not the way the global economy is going. And if there are manufacturing jobs to be had, a lot of them are going to be done by robots and computers. And what I've read this now in more than one place, that by the middle of the century, something like 50% of the jobs available in the world will be done by machines. Now what happens to all those human beings who are being literally dropped out of the economy? We know from the reports what's happening to middle-aged, working-class white males in this country who have been completely displaced in this global economy. They're committing suicide at an increasing rate. It's now the highest rate of any age group or ethnic group in the United States. So a whole generation that found its meaning in that old form of labor, of building this industrial world, are now being dropped out. A lot of them don't have college educations, right? They had really great union jobs, worked in factories all their lives, wanted their sons to have the same thing, and they're not going to have that same thing. So again, the meaning of labor. What is it for? Are we going to sit around and wait for big corporations to find jobs to employ some of these people? You know, wait again for them to tell us what the meaningful labor is going to be? Or can we begin to really rethink local economies from the ground up and how you create meaningful work right where you are? That's what's happening in some of these inner city projects. The farming and the food markets and the apprenticeships that are going on, the skill training. I'm trying to find little bits of money for some small business investments so some of the people who are working in the inner city in these projects and gaining skills can figure out how to create local markets that are sustaining, and then all of us participating in those local markets. We have to really rethink a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean you have to do everything, but to find the unique way in which you can participate in that and really see it as part of this organic whole. There's one kind of ecological way of life that's been this way of life of industrial economic growth in economic paradigms. There's another ecological way of life that is beginning to develop from the bottom up, and not just here, all over the world. I mean, what's been going on in Alberta and British Columbia around the tar sands and pipelines is absolutely inspiring. What First Nation peoples are doing up there to resist pipelines and stop them dead. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the tar sands industry in Alberta is in such crisis, because so many groups are able to stop the pipelines. They got to get the stuff to market. The only way to get it to market is to get it to port. The First Nations in BC won't let them do it in that direction, and they're trying to go east all the way to the eastern seaboard of Canada, and the First Nation groups there won't let them do it, and the folks in Nebraska and with the tribes, the Lakota and others in Dakota, wouldn't let the Trans-Canada pipeline go through, and you know, this is the way of things. That's the resistance. That's the resistance that we can be part of as we're also doing this. So as we do these projects, I think it would be really helpful and important for us to realize and to be conscious of the fact that these aren't just projects to stop a pipeline. These are projects to create community. What happened in Nebraska, especially this group Bold Nebraska, go to their website. If you ever need a little pick-me-up, go to the website of Bold Nebraska. And now they've started, because their work was so successful, a Bold Alliance, and there's now a Bold Iowa, and a Bold Oklahoma, and a Bold Louisiana. Because what happened in Bold Nebraska was so transformative of the culture there, where Republicans and Democrats, ranchers and environmentalists, and all these people got together in defense of their land and the threat of this pipeline. And they stopped it. And then they formed alliances with the indigenous communities, the American Indian groups up in the Dakotas, Lakota Sioux. They formed for a while what they called the Cowboy and Indian Alliance. That may be my favorite movement of the last years because it was so creative. And they all went to Washington with horses and teepees and campsite, and they set up camp in the mall. And it was just amazing what they did. And by being that creative, they got a lot of national attention, including in the mainstream media. You got to be big and bold and to get that attention, and they did a really good job. So that pipeline is stopped. Hopefully, I mean, it's not permanent. It could change again. They're very vigilant that they have to keep that movement going. But what did that group do? They created community. Unbelievable community. These people are friends for life, these ranchers and environmentalists, because they did this thing together. Some of the work they did to stop the pipeline was so creative. There was one place where the pipeline was going to go right through this ranch. This woman owned this ranch. It had been in her family for 3 generations. So at the height of the battle, when it really was not looking good, the Bold Nebraska people went out to her land, and right in the path of the pipeline, they built a wind turbine and a whole electric generating thing right on the path. And then they celebrated and had a big party, and they waved flags and banners, and they had Neil Young came and did a concert for them there, and this was unbelievable stuff. And basically the message was, how dare you think you're going to put a pipeline through my property? You know what? It didn't happen. And that wind turbine is still powering her ranch. So this is the thing about realizing that as bad as things are, there's some amazing stuff going on, and we can all be part of that. So, okay. I could go on, but we're going to stop. What I would like to do is maybe just, instead of watching right into questions, just take a minute or two to just sit with whatever is roiling around inside listening to this, because it's not easy. It's tough stuff. Hopefully there's some good energy too, but just sit for a minute and let the questions come up, or things you'd like to say in response to this, just for a minute or two. Okay, and then once again, please wait for the microphone to get to you.
Actually, what you seem to be saying without using the word is conversion, metanoia. And the thing that always struck me is the earth does not lie, the weather does not lie, it's always truthful, and that's the bottom line of all this. We don't feed it, take care of it, don't destroy it. We can try to predict the weather, we can't control it, or how the earth's going to respond. So I think it's a global metanoia.
Yeah, I agree. Remember, we're in conversation with the earth, so it's responding to us big time right now.
We think that all this stuff has happened just recently. As you were talking about this, I thought of a terrible thing that happened when I was a child. I was born in Milwaukee, and we used to have beautiful elm trees all over the north side, which was beautiful. And then there was a company that was bringing in stuff through the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. And on these things, they imported some insects that contaminated all the elm trees. And while I was a youngster, all the elm trees were killed and had to be torn down. And then we living in an area that was completely open and didn't have any trees. So if we think that this stuff is just happening in the last 5 or 10 years, we've been doing dumb things, way before that. And I think we always have to then be aware of what is really terribly contaminating. Maybe just a little bit losing elm trees isn't the worst thing that's ever happened to Wisconsin. But it was a terrible thing. It was a terrible thing.
Well, it was bad. I grew up on a street where we had a canopy of elm trees, and when Dutch elm came along, one by one, as those trees went down, it was like kind of having a piece of your heart cut out. I will never forget living through that as in my young years, absolutely. But no, I mean, the difference is the industrial scale of the devastation, even the fact that these invasive species are being brought in from ships around the world. That's something that we couldn't really do before. I mean, it used to take months to travel the ocean on a ship. But we have to remember that one of the reasons why the European monarchies started looking across the ocean to other lands is because they had devastated their own. I mean, Europe was completely deforested, right? But then the impacts are they're sort of contained in a certain area. What's changed is, again, the industrial scale of the devastation, the fact that the earth can't repair it fast enough. We can't keep up with the pace of the destruction. But yes, we've had a bad relationship with our eco-communities for a long time.
Can the profit motive be used for good, sound ecological practices?
It depends. I guess it depends on in what kind of an economy. Because right now the profit motive mostly resides with the big financial investors. I mean, we think about a company making something, selling it, they put a little price of profit on that price, and then they make a profit. And then maybe some stock. This is my father's economy, right? You buy some stock in that local company, and that gives them money to keep investing and working on the product. That economy doesn't exist anymore. Or if it does, it's very troubled, and you find out that a lot of businesses, when they get started, eventually get merged or bought up by a big corporation, right? So we're in this economy now that's at this scale where profit motive really is focused on financialization. We live in an economy that is based less and less on producing things and more on financialization, meaning capital, making profit off capital. That's what that whole mortgage fiasco is about. You know, you've had mortgage loans and people pay them back with a little interest. That kept the banks going and made it possible for people to buy their homes. That was the old way we used to do mortgages. But then when that financial profit motive, that big profit motive gets involved, now what can we do with these mortgages to make more money? And they start dividing them up, and they start doing this collateral debt stuff. And they, you know, if anybody hasn't seen The Big Short yet, you should watch it in community and have a big conversation, because it's a great education in what was behind that mortgage thing and what the financial institutions did. There is room for us, that kind of small business thing, absolutely. I mean, the Alice's Garden, one of the things that the director there, Venus Williams, has developed is this herbal product line. She develops these amazing organic herbal products and sells them, and for that little bit of extra profit, she's able to fund Alice's Garden. That's a wonderful, you know, sort of a closed circle of that kind of a small economy. But it's very hard to function in this big world where so much of that money, the investment money, is getting sucked up into that financialization, into the money markets. And that, I don't think there's a way through without curbing that. And that's not just true here. I mean, that's why there's riots in the streets in Europe right now. That's what the Brexit thing is all about. That's why there's big marches in Italy, I saw again. Actually, quite a dramatic video that I saw on Facebook early this morning, where there was this big march in Italy, and the police were there all lined up with their riot helmets and clubs, and then they joined the marchers and they took off their helmets and put down their clubs and marched with them. I mean, so that kind of stuff is going on because that global economy is really controlling people's lives in ways that's making it hard to survive at that local level.
Can you share some of the practices or programs that you've seen other communities or other groups undertake that made some real difference in educational and spirituality, lifestyle change?
Well, I think, you know, first of all, I would say there are a number of women religious congregations that have done extraordinary things by turning their properties into these spirituality and ecology centers, eco-education centers, places like Genesis Farm, that's now 40 years and more, has been around, and they still do eco-literacy training. You can go there for 3 months and do this total immersion into organic farming and eco-literacy. Thousands of people have gone through that program now, and then they go back and they're, you know, they're resources for their own local communities, for parishes, for other communities. So that kind of thing is going on in a lot of places, and that's been really great work that a lot of women have been doing. And Miriam Therese McGillis, who was one of the founders of Genesis Farm, was always saying, you know, if you have to sell the furniture and sell the computers and but don't sell the property. I mean, that was the thing, is hang on to these places because we need them as spaces where that kind of witness can go on. In Milwaukee, again, this is very direct experience, the network of urban farms like Alice's Garden, that little all people's church garden, Victory Garden Initiative, which is, they've got grants where they can bring raised bed gardens to the poorest people in the city. They will come and build the raised bed for you, and all the materials are free, and someone will work with you to teach people how to raise food in their backyards. That's going on. And then that's connected to these markets like Fondy Market, which is very close to Alice's Garden. This is a summer market, just got started this last week, where a lot of people are starting to sell their stuff. And so we have an inner city farmers market with all this wonderful fresh food. That became part, and a lot of you may have heard of Will Allen and Growing Power. The fact that got started in Milwaukee a long time ago. There's been a lot of teaching and training that's gone on there as well. A lot of kids that still love to go out there. They bring the kids out from schools and they love to put their hands into the compost and get covered with worms and all that stuff. It's just great. It's just great to see that happen. So little by little over the years, that's actually becoming a real network of local producers, young entrepreneurs, people opening little businesses. There's another nonprofit in Milwaukee called Walnut Way, where people on one block where this house was just taken over by a drug operation. They decided they'd had enough, and they kind of drive this drug house out of the neighborhood. The house was taken over by them, bought by someone who then gave it to the nonprofit, and they turned it into, again, another center, another ecological center, another food, right, the empty lot next door. They put in peach trees, and there's peach trees. And now it's producing at such a point where they're selling peaches in these local markets every year. And so there's stuff like that. So, to get involved in actual hands-on developing over time of these kind of alternative networks, it can be very inspiring.
Right in our backyard, the retreat center, Mount Galvin Retreat Center, was sold to this environmental group, and it's been struggling. They call it the Refuge now, and they have a new director, Corey Chisel, who's also a musician, and is quite influential, has a lot of networks. And so I think, look in your backyard, or like in our backyard, is this effort of young people who dream about taking that property. I went to a concert to support refugee efforts last Saturday, and behind the retreat center, between the retreat center and the river, they had set up, like a stage. They had wonderful music and refugees coming. And then Corey Chisel and his wife, Adrielle, are kind of like the leaders, and they got up and spoke about the mission of the refuge. And they started by saying, this land once was considered sacred by the indigenous peoples. Then the Capuchin monks came, and they built this wonderful retreat center, and Corey is open to the Franciscan imagination too. He's out of Nashville. He's a well-known artist. So I'm thinking from all this, that more and more we should be cooperating right in our backyard with something like that.
Absolutely. That's how we show people that there's another way that's possible. That's not only possible, but maybe even more fun and meaningful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the other thing is, after a while, these networks start getting really involved also in how you then change, how that becomes a seedbed of change beyond just your project. I mean, that's the thing about like watching a food network like this develop in Milwaukee. It starts having policy implications. City grants start to go to support it. It starts putting light on our terrible segregation problems. I mean, and Alice's Garden has created a space. It's maybe it's probably the only space I know of in Milwaukee where African Americans and white people can get together and talk about racism as honestly as we do. So, because a space has been created of trust through these projects and through getting to know each other by doing this together. And as you see from some of the artwork too, I mean, art, culture, music, this is all part of it. It's how you create a new ecological culture. I mean, one of the things that inspired so much of the anti-war movement, the civil rights movements way back when, was the music, right? The symbols, and there's incredibly creative stuff that's going on in some of these communities that we can all help lend a hand to making it visible, again, participating, opening the spaces where this can happen. And then the next step is looking at where, and we'll talk about this a little bit more this afternoon, looking at how you see this in the context of what holds it back. Where do we see the powers that be, where it's hard to break through, and how you can use a lot of these projects as a way to educate people about how the system works and why that system needs to be changed and where we can find the spaces to begin cracking some of that cracking some of those walls that make it hard for people, even when they have these wonderful things going on, to be something other than just a project of poor people, but actually projects that can transform lives and become something else.
Thank you, Margaret, for this. This is very sobering. And you pointed to the population boom, and then you also mentioned how natural habitats were destroyed in order to make grain fields for mass production, I'm presuming. Do you see local and regional economies sustaining these larger populated areas? Because I guess I get a sense that the global economy is trying to sustain these larger populated areas, whether in North America, but I'm thinking maybe in Asia, in these maybe poorer climates. Can a local regional community sustain these larger populated areas?
Yes, if they learn how to live within the limits of their bioregion. If we keep insisting that we don't have to do that, then you need these larger systems that can move the resources around. And I can give you a couple examples of what I mean. In Maine has great water, right? And I want to be sure I get the company right, so don't quote me on this. It may be Poland Spring, one of those big water companies, that's tapping the water in Maine. They're bottling it in China, and they're selling it to water-starved Saudi Arabia. That's keeping a big system going, right? But it's not sustainable. For one thing, it's not sustainable. It will crash. You can't keep doing that forever. I mean, these big systems are actually accelerating the depletion of the planet. It's like I like to tell people, economic growth is not growth, it's depletion. We're not growing, we're using up. And that idea of growth is just fake, because we're using up more and more stuff. Or what just the decision made in the Waukesha water request. You know, they decided to let them have their water yesterday. So I don't know what that means yet for the future, whether this will be an exception or if it opens the door to more requests like that. But why did Waukesha have this problem? Waukesha doesn't have this problem because of all their aquifers are going dry and are full of radium now. They have this problem because they recklessly use their water resources to do the sprawl, to make Waukesha grow, thinking that water would be there forever, and then you go, oops. I mean, southeastern Wisconsin, northwestern Illinois, we're all part of an aquifer system that's draining dry. In the northwestern suburbs of Chicago, I heard a water technology person from the University of Green Bay said that they've got about a 20 to 30 year supply left. What happens to those big suburbs in northwest Illinois when that water's gone? Where are they going to get? I suppose tapping into Lake Michigan. That's what that battle about the Complex Basin Treaty was, because people could see that aquifers were going to go dry. So what would Waukesha look like if it had lived within the water limits of its bioregion? What would Southern California look like? Now again, people didn't set out to do this, but once we know, we are challenged with how you develop economies that bring us back into balance with what the planet has. Because even if those big systems are keeping big population centers going for now, they're not going to be able to do it much longer. And if we haven't found another way to bring this back to the local and regional level, what happens when those systems break down? I mean, and we may have one of the early lessons when the Colorado River runs dry. I mean, already what's going on in the West is so terrifying. You know, Lake Mead they're getting very close to the intake pipes. They're going to have to put in all new pipes down below. It's going to be billions of dollars. And then what? Because they're taking all this water from here and they're sending it down over there. So the big systems, that's part of what's not working anymore, which is why we have to rethink how we live back in our own bioregions. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a radical change in our lifestyles and our expectations.
Where is it at as regards reforestation? I'm originally from Wisconsin here. I left this place in 1959. I'm amazed at how much it's recuperated as far as its forests. and natural life. And I understand this was due to government projects. You had the Civilian Conservation Corps and Burgundy Person. And there was overproduction for a while, and so the farmers were paid to take their land out of production. I don't know if that still continues. Whereas in Central America, the experience has been just the opposite. What used to be solid jungle is now pasture lands. So my question is there anything on the government's part to try and reforest and, well, because we have these vast lawns where we keep this grass down there nice and short. Couldn't some of that stuff be converted into reforestation?
As a matter of fact, I just heard this not too long ago, that lawns are the #1 agricultural product. Lawns. Is this the best use of our land? We actually have enormous industrial farms producing sod, lawns. Right, I mean, the thing about Wisconsin is that, well, we've got a problem now. Because, not to be too political, right? We have kind of an anti-environment state government right now. It's tragic. It's sort of sad. But yes, Wisconsin for a long time, with Aldo Leopold and all that, had an incredible conservation record. And it's sort of sad to see that progress eroding because it is a beautiful state. That's why the frac sand mining just is so heartbreaking. I can't stand even to look at the photographs of it. I saw it from the above flying to Minneapolis one time, and it just really. Deforestation. There's still more deforestation than reforestation going on globally. But they're, like in Indonesia, they're deforesting like crazy for palm oil, palm plantations for palm oil. And so there are places where there's just terrible devastation, where the tar sands are going on, that industrial region in Alberta, that's boreal forest. That picture you saw, that was once boreal forest, and the destruction is vast. So there's serious issues around that. And the United Nations Environmental Program and the conventions that they've been signing, they're trying to reverse that trend. There are also a lot of wonderful projects where people are reforesting. It's like Wangari Maathai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who died a couple of years ago of cancer, who started a project in Kenya because it was so deforested, went out with a group of women, they planted a few trees. Most of them died. And they went out and planted a few more trees, and then this movement kept growing. People from villages kept coming out to be part of this planting tree project. And the last count I heard, they had planted over 20 million trees in Kenya since she started this movement. So again, that didn't come from above. That came from, really from below. So we should be inspired by that stuff. Okay, I'm supposed to stop. I just got the...
I don't know who did that. I don't know.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Margaret. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and then come back. The schedule's changing a little bit so that we have time for the food to come out before